Hello, welcome everyone. It's a very lovely sunny afternoon here in New York City. Super excited actually to do this webinar. This is my very first webinar with Loire Valley Wines. My name is Arthur Hong. I'm the beverage director at Momofuku Co. here in New York City. And I have the pleasure of working with Loire Valley Wines for many, many years. And also currently the US ambassador to Touraine AOP as well. So Loire is definitely a region that's very special to me. For those of you that have been to the region before, you can kind of understand that sort of the region itself, it's full of a lot of different food-related items, histories, and everything that you sort of think about what France is about, both the culture and also the beverages as well. Sort of the quintessential of the icons are all compacted into Loire Valleys. And so each year, Loire Valley Wine does a Spring to Loire event. And unfortunately, that due to the current pandemic, that was postponed. So super glad to be able to bring a sort of more of a digital format of that to today's webinars. And then we'll have actually more information about the Spring to Loire event here in the US at the end of our webinars. I'll be announcing that, so stay tuned. And so kind of get right into it. And so for those of you that are here, and I want to kind of, want to announce sort of one competition. So during the next 45 minutes, we'll be sort of sharing a lot of different information with you. And the one thing that I want to mention is that, to keep everyone on their toes and stay tuned, we have a contest of 3 different questions. So all of the questions will be basically information mentioned during the webinar and related to that. And there will be 3 winners. Each winners will be able to receive 2 bottles out of the 6 wines that will be discussed today. So stay tuned and be very exciting. And the way to submit your answer will be through the chat functions in the webinars. And the first one to provide the correct answers will be the winners. And we'll have someone keep track in the back end. So don't be afraid, get your answer out as soon as you can. And we'll be make sure that the questions are not too difficult, but also keep you paying attention as well. So kind of going into Loire, and I wish I could see all of your faces, and I know that their panelists are up there. But I have, been talking about Loire for a very long time. I had the opportunity to visit Loire for the first time last year. And so one thing about Loire is that, of course, the Loire River is the longest river in France. And what that means is that it kind of provides sort of perfect place and environment of not only for viticulture, but also for produce and anything that's related to that, such as foods. For instance, examples for that could be the tartartans, one of the most iconic desserts that you can find in Loire Valley. Of course, the cheese as well, and produce and all kinds of agriculture products. So that's, aside from viticulture, that's what Loire truly well known is. Really is the garden of France, something that's not only beautiful, but because of the Loire River that really provide that host to everything that's possible. And alongside with that, to create a foundation for Loire being the #1 white wine producing regions in France, and also super well known for its sparkling wine, basically second to champagnes in terms of sparkling wine projections. And within sort of the white wine production, there's a lot of different varieties that you can find in this region. Sauvignon Blanc, for instance, which is sort of our topic for today. However, you're also going to find Cabernet Franc. You're going to find Chenin Blanc, Melon de Bourgogne, and all kinds of different red wines are also being grown in these regions. And they're all known for very classic. So 3 markers, if you will. They're also very fresh, fruity, very enjoyable, and also very friendly when it comes to food and wine pairings. And on top of that, I know that in the summertime, it's warm, and there's definitely a trend here in the US for kind of seeking out lower alcohol beverages. And don't forget about the wines coming from Loire Valley. They're definitely low in alcohol. And all of that, I think that what's so unique about having this webinar and the topic of Sauvignon Blanc from the Loire Valley with the rich offering beyond Sancerre is that all these wines are made in relatively similar form, where it's very hands-off, and there's not a lot of techniques are being dominated in these bottles. We can really kind of dive in and really taste the wine itself and the place it comes from. And aside from that, sort of leads into that very unique terroir. And one thing that I'm very excited about is that all of the wines that we're tasting today are coming from the 2018 vintage. So we will all be able to, that with the panelists, are be able to kind of dive in and really kind of discuss what their thoughts in terms of where these wines comes from. And on top of that, outside of Sancerre, I'm super excited that we are able to get really as many different appellations are really well known for Sauvignon Blanc as well. So I can't wait to hear what the panelists have to say. And one last thing I want to talk about the wines coming from the Loire Valley is that they are very budget friendly. We'll also be sharing their suggested retail pricing on average here with you as we go through the wines. But overall, their price range pretty much around about sort of low teens to about mid-20s. So all of that on the retail shelves are super affordable. They deliver high qualities, and on top of that, they're easy to drink, low alcohol, and super refreshing. With that said, before we go in and introduce the panelists, I also want to mention that if you have access to 750s, and we'll be posting a link that the panelists above that actually have selected their Loire favorite picks. So not only the wines that we'll be tasting today, but they are sort of also the favorites when they think about Loire wines. So be super excited to kind of cross-referencing and then throughout the webinar and just kind of getting a closer peek at the panelists that we have today. So it is my pleasure to introduce the three panelists joining me this afternoon. I have Moselle Watson, the business owner of Wines by Moselle's. And I also have Hilary Zio, the wine consultant and educators. And finally, we also have Rebecca Banks, the corporate beverage director at Keith McNally Group. So with that said, I'm going to ask my very first question. So I hope you're listening. Again, the rule is that there will be 3 questions throughout the webinars. The way to submit the answer is through the chat function. And the first one to give out correct answers will be the winner for that question. And you will be also receiving 2 out of the 6 bottles that will be tasting today. So the first question is, so aside from sort of the Loire Valley's world classic wines, what are the 3 other treasures that I mentioned earlier, I also consider sort of the icons of the Loire Valleys. So again, so what are the 3 treasures that's outside of the Loire Valley world classic wines are sort of things are known here in Loire Valley? Great, so we're actually talking about the things that are not related to wine. So think about the Garden of France, think about, great, getting closer. 3 things. So just think about things that are non-viticulture. Think about maybe the food. Great, great. Perfect. Thank you for mentioning cheese. So definitely goat cheese is one thing that's very iconic of Loire Valley as well. Cool, so continue to submit the answer if you like. And let's dive right into the first 2 wines. So welcome, Moselle.
Hi, pleasure. So today I have the pleasure of showcasing 2 beautiful wines from Loire Valley, as you guys know. But before I get into that, let me give you a few factoids about these wines and where they come from. The first wine I will be showcasing is the Vigneron's du Balconnet Sauvignon Blanc, which comes from the Indication Geographique Protégée, or the IGP Val de Loire region, which happens to be the most important geographical region as far as size, being the biggest, being the hugest one. I can show you the wine if you guys are interested in seeing it. This is the label here. So I will pour myself a glass and we'll get into some tasty notes about it. If you don't mind. Here we go. So this wine, being pale yellow in color, fresh acidity on the nose, fruity, floral. It's also friendly, food friendly, very food friendly on the nose. Quick tasting notes. I get green apple, pears, citrus actually. Then it has a little bit of lemon zest. That is the first wine. Hopefully I'm not going too fast or speeding through my words and you guys can hear me. Lost you guys again. The second wine I will be showcasing is also from the Loire Valley, obviously. But this one, it comes from the AOP, the appellation d'origine protégée, or AOP, Touraine, which is massive, which has the most hectares, I believe, in the Loire Valley, having 5,000 different varietals or hectares, 5,000 square foot hectares, sorry, stumbling, getting a little nervous. Of vines, which some of my personal favorites like Cab Franc, Cabernet, or Chinon. But like I said, we're here to talk about Sauvignon Blanc. I will show you the Touraine. If you guys can see it, here's the bottle here. I will pour myself another glass. So this is the first glass, not the mixed wine. You can never mix the wine. You should never mix the wine. So here I am pouring the Touraine. Smooth sniff. Wow, this is beautiful. What a fantastic nose. Has that funky sort of vegetal grass feeling up front. As far as the tasting notes, I'd like to take a quick sip. Sorry, enjoyed that one a little too much. I had a little lemon, gooseberry, pineapple, dry pineapple rinds. Actually, more full of a body Touraine, which is one of my favorite. I love recommending Touraines because it's so close to Sancerre, and it gives everything that the Sancerre has, but it's actually half the price. Both of these wines separately. This is $12 and this is $14. The Touraine is also the second largest. So the two largest regions or the areas would be Val de Touraine and the Loire. I feel like I'm butchering that. So those are the two largest regions, and those are the two wines I'm showcasing today. If you have any questions, I'm here to answer them.
Thank you, Moselle. I do have a question for you.
Please.
I think that, when you're tasting these two wines, hopefully that some of our audience were able to get some of these bottles and be able to taste along with us. But for those that are not able to taste along with us, how would you compare these two wines to Sancerre that you're familiar with?
So
in
comparison to Sancerre, I would say these two wines, they have the fruit, the structure, the body, and I personally prefer them more because with Sancerre, there becomes the mirage of like, oh, it's a Sancerre, whereas these Touraines and the Sauvignon Blanc is just like classics. Well, it's not as known, and it's more fun to drink because you can experiment. Like with Sancerre, they have a sort of it's sort of like champagne. They have this backing behind it where you have expectations of it. Whereas these wines, there's more experiments going on. You can taste the minute flavors of like citrus or the gooseberry or the lemongrass. I mean, the lemon zest on the nose is something that I don't really find too much on Sancerres. They usually are like cut and dry. These are more fresh and fun, as one would say. And these are easier to pair with food as well. Something as simple as asparagus or any seafood. Or if you want to get real crazy, you can do something like potato chips, like a dry Lay's potato chip in the Touraine would be fantastic.
Great. That sounds like really fun. A potato chip goes well with anything. So I think that, kind of outside of the beers or champagnes, I think that knowing that a Sauvignon Blanc coming from the Loire Valley will work really well. It's very exciting. And so I kind of want to bring attention to the Corbière. So this wine is actually really interesting. So this is actually a very classic 100% Sauvignon Blanc grown on a soil type that we don't typically think of, because when you think about Loire Valley, it's a lot of fossils, it's ancient lakes, a lot of sort of calcareous limestones and chalk soils and all of that. But for a Corbière, basically in the eastern edge of the Touraine AOP, it's basically grown on mostly sandy soil. So this is a very unique characteristics of this part of the Loire, and definitely very different than the soil that you can find in Sancerre. So one thing that the freshness, the lemongrass, and that easy drinking quality does come through for this part of the Loire Valleys. Great. So now moving on to the next two wines that will be representing. So Hilary, would you like to take it away?
All right, thanks so much. So wine number 3 here is the Jean-Michel Sorbe. This is from Quincy. So I don't know if you can see the map here, but we're just moving east. So all the way over, it's you know, just west of the region of Sancerre, but this is a tiny little appellation along the Cher River. So there's only 2 communes, 250 hectares about, and really just 30 producers here. So even though it is so tiny, it was actually the second appellation created in France. So Châteauneuf-du-Pape was the first, and they're known for producing Sauvignon Blanc, just almost exclusively. And we know there are so many different varietals in the Loire Valley, but this appellation is really just going to be Sauvignon Blanc. And the grapes here actually ripen really early, about 2 weeks earlier even than in Sancerre. And that just has to do with a warmer mesoclimate, just a lot of sunshine in that area. And you're going to hear a little bit about sandy and gravel soil when you're in the Quincy region. And again, that sunlight kind of, when I tasted this earlier today, I had a lot of ripe citrus fruit. And I'm sure that's because it, you know, like I said, ripens earlier and it has that warm mesoclimate. But my tasting notes are lemon rind, just a lot of citrus, some white peaches. I think it's really important to think about the quality of the fruit with this wine because it is ripe. It's a lot more ripe than the last 2 that we just tasted, in my opinion. I'd love to hear what you guys say, but I would pair this, you know, with a summer salad, maybe cherry tomatoes and sweet corn, because it does have all that just like ripe, citrusy fruit. It's fruit forward in my opinion. But yeah, this is just a 3-hectare vineyard and practicing minimal intervention, kind of like what Arthur was talking about. That's really important in a lot of places in the Loire Valley. So yeah, I think this is a beautiful wine. Well, I'll move right on to the 4th wine. So we're talking about the region of Rouy here. And this is Domaine Mabillot. And Rouy is just neighboring Quincy, right over there, just touching it. But a different river actually runs through this region. The river is called the Amon and runs right down the middle. It's slightly larger, but they still do focus on Sauvignon Blanc. Other than Sauvignon Blanc, though, you're going to see a lot of Pinot Noir. So they do rosé and red from Pinot Noir, but they specialize in something called vin gris, or gray wine is what it translates to, and it's practically 0 maceration time, and they use Pinot Noir for that. So that's another thing that this region's kind of known for, which is kind of cool. And if you've been to Loire, I went a couple years ago, you won't notice super steep slopes really anywhere, you know, rolling hills or kind of flat depending, but this region does have several rolling slopes that contain clay and limestone primarily. And this region, they've actually got some fossilized shells. So similar to Chablis, you've got that Kimmeridgian era seashell thing going on. And when I try this wine, it really has that on the palate, especially on the finish. A lot of that just brininess. I'd kind of like to pair it with oysters or mussels, clams, maybe some like raw scallops. It's not really leading with fruit, whereas the last one did. And it's the soil, but also it's a cooler climate than the last one too. And it's $21. So if you do like Chablis and getting that Kimmeridgian clay kind of minerality on the finish, then this is definitely going to be budget friendly. I mean, like most Loire Valley wines, right? Very budget friendly, but you can get all that minerality without paying Chablis prices, which is kind of nice. And then light bodied, I'm really not getting too much fruit here. I don't know about you guys, maybe a little citrus, but not that ripe stone fruit that was on the last one. But yeah. Any questions so far? Arthur, you have any questions?
Yes, thank you so much, Hillary. So I do have a question, a few questions. The first one, the same one that I asked Moselle is that for those audience that didn't have the wine in front of them, so how would you compare these two, Quincy and Rouilly? Are they similar to a Sancerre, or how are they different than a Sancerre?
Right, I think they're different. Well, both have a lighter body, in my opinion. I think as you move towards Sancerre, you're gonna have that weightiness on the palate, whereas these definitely do not. The Quincy, like I mentioned, is really fruit forward, even more so than some Sancerre that I've had. And then the Rouilly has all that crazy fossilized minerality. So that's gonna be the difference as far as tasting.
Great. And you talked quite a bit about food and wine pairings.
I did.
A very specific example. Thank you so much.
Sure.
I think that one thing that, sort of the easier way, that's sort of applications for anyone that be able to taste this wine or not, is be able to kind of understand how to work with food. So do you have one sort of the most unexpected wine pairing that you would say from these wines?
You know, that's a good question. I'm sort of always going to go with what grows together goes together. And when I have a really fruity wine, I don't like to put anything too vegetal, right, with it. So I like to really stick with that, especially the first one. But with the second one from Rouilly and other wines from this region that I've had actually taste really good with bacon. And so that's more of a different tasting, right? But I think it's mainly the heightened acidity, the saltiness. It just like works with the fat, kind of cutting right through the fat, you know, with the heightened acidity.
Perfect. Thank you so much for mentioning bacon. I know that there's always sort of the classic sort of mindset of white has to go with seafoods, or red wine has to go with meats, but that's not always the case. It's always, acid is super important. And so in the sense that with something that's riper in fruits, higher in acid, bacon, definitely a great choice like that as well. You can drink this from breakfast to the evening whenever you like.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you so much, Hillary. So Hillary, would you like to ask your question?
Yes. What region do they also produce a Vin Gris, or a gray wine with practically zero maceration time from Pinot Noir?
Great. Thank you for the answer. So Vin Gris, I love the term because, there's several different ways of saying a rosé wines. And then sort of colors are always, it's a good reference. And but so the gray style wine, for me, it's very whimsical. A lot of times that you kind of see producer taking that turns but making something that's very delicate and aromatic. So thank you for the questions, Hillary. So now, Rebecca.
Okay. Hi, how are you? Thanks for having me. So I'm going to talk about the last two wines. The first one that I'm talking about is a Menetou-Salon. This is from Domaine Pellet, and I'm really familiar with this wine because we've had this on the list at Balthazar for a long time. And they're very, very consistent from year to year in their quality. Again, this is the 2018. And you can see that Menetou-Salon is just to the west of Sancerre. It's about 20 miles, I guess, as the crow flies, just a little bit southwest of Sancerre. And it's a very small appellation. It was one of the last, I think it didn't become an AOC or an AOP until 1950s or so. So, but they grow Sauvignon Blanc and Pinot Noir, and they make white and red and rosé. Very charming rosés from Pinot Noir, in fact. But of course, this one is 100% Sauvignon Blanc. And it can be very similar to Sancerre because it is right next door to it. The soil here is Kimmeridgian marl, which is essentially limestone. So you get really, really great drainage with this limestone. And there's this particular cuvee is called Morog. So this is one of the few single villages within the appellation, and all of the grapes are coming from 7 different plots within Morog. And this is pretty concentrated in that limestone, so you get a little bit of this great exposure. So you get some ripeness, but you also get great drainage in this kind of soil. So I feel like this wine is one of the better representations of Menetou-Salon. The quality is generally pretty high, but this is one of my absolute favorites. So this wine is family owned, going back about 4 generations, but they've been planting grapes here longer than that. And they use here a combination of, it's 100% fermented in stainless steel. So that's really going to keep that crisp, fruit forward quality. And then it's aged in mostly stainless steel, but a little bit of oak barrels. And I feel like this wine, especially compared to the next one that I'm doing, does pick up a little bit of that oak kind of vanilla, but that gives it a sort of a softness on the finish, which I really like about these wines. So because of that high proportion of limestone, you get this really crisp, fresh, fruity flavor and aroma on here. Super, super friendly. It's a classic example of Menetou-Salon, and I think it's showing really well now, but it's going to be great for another 5 years. I wouldn't go too much longer. This one, because it has a little bit of oak in it, it can age maybe just a touch longer. On the nose, you get a lot of that typical classic grapefruit, gooseberry, and then on the palate, and citrus, of course. On the palate, I get a lot of those same citrus, lemon, lime notes, but also a little bit of this salinity that Hillary was talking about in her wines. This sort of salty backbone, if you will, that just kind of gives the wine this nice little linear finish. This one is certified organic, all hand harvested, and it's interesting that I think 13% of the vineyards in the Loire Valley are organic, and I know that number is growing probably every day, but very, very a lot of attention to the way that the vines are treated or not treated, and then vinified as well. So as far as pairing, I mean, I always find these, well, before pairing, I find these wines to be extremely budget friendly. This one retails for $21. But again, there are definitely Menetou-Salons on the market that are well under $20. So this one, I feel like it really, really over delivers just that extra couple bucks, and it's so worth your while. But I find these wines to be just a little bit softer and a little friendlier, if you will, than Sancerre. Sancerre can sometimes be a little bit too laser sharp, and this wine has a little bit of roundness to it, which in part is maybe from a little bit oak aging, and maybe just that the hillside vineyards are not as severe as you might find in Sancerre. And for pairing, I mean, this wine personally, I would drink it by itself because it's so charming, but you could pair these with seafood, white meat, pork, chicken, sandwiches, crudité, little picky things. I would have said French fries, but chips is good too. But yeah, this, I feel like it's underlooked a little bit, and it's always one of the best wines on our lists that we have that, you know, just really over deliver for the price. So any other questions about Menetou-Salon? No? Should I just move on to the next one? Okay, I'll do it. The last wine, and I am tasting, but I can't multitask, so I'm telling you it's really good, and I took good notes. The last wine that I'm going to do for the day is Pouilly-Fumé. I think if you haven't heard of Pouilly-Fumé, you know, I don't know where you are, but I think Pouilly-Fumé is probably one of the appellations that is known almost as much as Sancerre. So Pouilly-Fumé is literally across the Loire River, and that river is not very big. You could yell to somebody on the other side and they could probably hear you. Between the city center of Sancerre and Pouilly-sur-Loire, which is the main town in the appellation, it's about 5 miles. It's really, really close. Evidently they have like cricket teams that play each other. It's so close. So I love this particular wine. This is Francis Blanchet, super, super traditional label. You see Sancerre's with this label. I've seen Ruiz with this label, Menetou-Salon. It's a classic Loire Valley font, I guess. Again, 2018, again, 100% Sauvignon Blanc. In Pouilly-Fumé, you can only plant Sauvignon Blanc and have Pouilly-Fumé on the label. They don't plant red grapes, and they don't really make any other style of wine, if I'm not mistaken. It's only white, still wine. So this wine, so Pouilly, not to be confused with Pouilly-Fuissé, which is in Burgundy. This is Pouilly-Fumé. Pouilly comes from the village of Pouilly-sur-Loire, which is the center of the appellation. And Fumé literally means smoky. And so there's a couple theories. Some say there's this beautiful fog that settles on the area and it looks smoky. But really, if we want to get down to like technical stuff, there is a high proportion of this silex soil. So it's a type of flinty soil that is in the terroir here. And if you take 2 of these flint pieces and you snap them together or hit them together, it literally smells like gunpowder or fireworks. And you find this soil also in parts of Sancerre. So it's just kind of spread throughout. This particular wine comes exclusively from a single plot that is has this silex soil, and of course it's actually called Cuvée Silice, which also refers to silex, which refers to this flint, and it gives the wines this sort of smoky gun flint aroma. I find this one doesn't express it obviously, but sometimes as the wine gets older, this wine's still very young, it starts to come out a little bit more as the wine ages. So I find Pouilly-Fumés to be just a little bit more aromatic in maybe a more of a savory way than Sancerre. It's sometimes splitting hairs between the two, between the producers and the vintages. Sometimes these wines can, you know, be hard to tell apart if you're blind tasting them. What was the next thing I was going to say? Oh, and also they tend to be a little bit richer because in general, the landscape in Pouilly-Fumé is a little bit lower. There are some of those rolling hills, but again, not as severe as what you can find in Sancerre. So the wines do tend to be a little bit richer. They get a little bit riper. Again, this is all very, very general. They also tend to be a little less expensive than Sancerre. I feel like that gap is really closing now because I have seen Pouilly-Fumés as expensive, if not more expensive than some Sancerres. And there's so much production of Sancerre too that you can find every price point that you really need if you look for it. But in general, Pouilly-Fumé is a little bit less expensive. This one actually retails for $21, which I think is a steal for Pouilly-Fumé because I've certainly seen it for a lot more. But again, they can rival each other in price and in quality. I find this particular wine to be very aromatic. Like I said, you get those classic gooseberry, grapefruit. Nobody said cat pee. I honestly did not get cat pee in any of these wines. So kudos to the winemakers. But I get a lot of citrus notes, a lot of that mouth-watering acidity. Here I get not only like lemon, but Meyer lemon and some melon notes. So a little, not tropical, but a little bit more intense, but super, super pure and lively, very fruit forward and extremely food friendly, which is one of our big points today for Loire wines. This is a natural pairing for the local goat cheeses or chèvre that you find around Sancerre. I love this with like a cream of tomato or cream of mushroom soup. The acid really can cut through that, but it can also go really well with a fish stew or something like a broth-based stew. White meats, seafood, lobster. I mean, there's not a lot of smoked oysters was going to be my like #1 pairing for this because of the smokiness of the oyster and the smokiness of a little sea salt on it would be like my day in heaven. I actually had a Pouilly-Fumé last week with fish tacos, and that was awesome. A little cilantro, you know, it's just perfect. So, you know, you can go so many different ways, sort of fried seafood. I could go on and on. This also pairs really well with Asian cuisines like Vietnamese and Thai food. So think of that coconut milk and a cilantro and nothing super spicy, but it can also stand up to things like asparagus and artichokes that are really hard to pair with. So yeah, Pouilly-Fumé could just solve all your problems right now, as far as I'm concerned. So.
Thank you, Rebecca. Love your fish taco pairings. I think that, you know, a lot of times when we think about these wine coming from France or from Loire, you know, you kind of say, well, I have to have something that's maybe on the fancier side or French cuisines, but it's, you know, or maybe somewhere coming from more European origin, but that's not always the truth. You know, think about, you know, the chips pairing, think about the taco pairing, think about the bacon pairings. You know, like there are a lot of food resources at our disposal that will work fantastically with all these wines. So don't be afraid of thinking about outside the box. And thank you for that very detailed chat about where they're from and also the pairing as well. And one thing I want to kind of recap is the versatility of these wines to work with herbs. I know that right now, spring chimes, in summertime, you have so many more produce that's available right now than the winter months and the fall months. So don't be afraid. You know, we add a little bit of tarragons, chives, you know, parsley. All of those will work really great with these wines coming from Loire. They, you know, nothing too spicy, but you know, really, you can, you know, nothing can go wrong with a bottle of these, any of these 6 different Sauvignon Blanc coming from outside of Sancerre in Loire Valley. Thank you so much. So with that, and I do want to ask you a questions, Rebecca. Like, what would you say? You know, like which one of these appellation that we discuss is actually your go-to, you know, that's outside of Sancerre. If you're on the floor, where would you like to steer the guest toward to any of these appellations? Which one would you say?
Oh my God. Well, I think if we're gonna go, I know, it's like, well, how much time do we have? Sophie's choice. I think if we're going for value and just bang for your buck, I always think Touraine to me is like, you can't go wrong because they're not gonna spend too much money. They're always satisfied. It's like gives you that Sancerre freshness and, you know, sort of energy, but without spending a lot of money. If they want to get a little fancier and get something a little richer, maybe they like more of a Chardonnay, then I would go to something like a Pouilly-Fumé, like, you know, maybe even seize a little oak or something like that. I do see that the barrels in that Pellet uses are used barrels. So there's not, when I say oak, I'm not talking about brand new like toasted oak barrels. They're used, so it's really giving just more of a texture, if you will. But yeah, you could kind of go either way. But then I love giving people like a Quincy or Rouy because they're just like these little gems on a wine list too. So if you want to give them something that's budget friendly, but also maybe they've never had before, I always find people are pleasantly surprised when they order those. Those are tough. Those are basically hand sells, I think, for me. But,
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that. So now, thank you again to all the 3 panelists. We have one last question for today. Moselle, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, so earlier, if you were able to follow me, I mentioned 2 of the largest regions in the Loire Valley, or as far as size, what were they? What were the 2 largest AOP and IGP regions in the Loire Valley? What are the two biggest ones? Close.
So close. Think about all the appellations that we talked about today. Thank you. Perfect. We have a winner.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening. It's been really fun to showcasing all of these different appellations, and hope that the panelists also enjoyed the bottles as well. And we're kind of getting close to the end of our webinars, so I want to kind of open this up to any Q&A that all of our audience have, whether it's to myself or to any of the panelists, to all of that. So feel free to type in your questions.
I saw somebody asked about Alphonse Melot using oak, and I know that not all cuvées, but he does have at least one cuvée where he does, I think, use a little bit of new oak. And if I'm not mistaken, he does like a later release on one of his wines too, like Crochet does one as well. So it's like a aged Sancerre. So that's, yeah, but that's the exception usually.
Yeah, for sure. I think that all of the wines that we talked about today are more or less either fully stainless steel or neutral vessels. It's really, the point is to showcasing the Sauvignon Blanc grape, but it's not so much about the textures. Great. So one thing I like to talk about, well, kind of mention, is the viticulture practice in Loire, which both Hilary and also Rebecca mentioned a little bit. About how these wines are made and who makes them. So one thing about Loire is so exciting is that it's not, it's an old traditional regions, but it doesn't have the sort of traditional bounds demand such as Bordeaux, Champagne, or Burgundy. So it's relatively very spread out region. It's not as heavily planted as you think in comparison to all the other French wine regions. So think about a difference between Napa Valley versus Sonoma Valley or Oregon, if you will. So because of that openness, in terms of land under vines, a lot more experiments and also free thinkings are very welcome. So one thing about Loire Valley is so super exciting is that it's one of the number one wine region that are creating most job right now in France, because the lands are cheaper, equipments are much more affordable. So younger generations of winemaker can come into Loire and make wine. They probably did not have the same opportunity if they were going to Bordeaux, Burgundy, or Champagne. So what that does is that creating a lot of free way of thinking, which leads to more of a hands-off, non-interventional practices, that biodynamic practices or sustainable practices, and all of that. So you're gonna see that, especially here in the New York market, we're seeing a lot of sort of quote unquote natural wines coming out of this region, and that's the reason why. So all of these wines that we tasted and discussed today, they're kind of ranging from Blue Resonates, which is sort of doing the best they can to protect the land at the same time protecting what they do, to all the way to biodynamic farming practices. But all that I can say is that all the producers in Loire Valleys are super mindful of what they do, and then sort of that generations and what they pass on to the next generations as well. So for those of you that are very interested in about drinking wines that are non-interventional or with good mindful practices, these are great choices. And I saw there's a question earlier. Any dessert wine from the Loire Valley with Sauvignon Blanc? That's actually very good questions. Not officially, because if you're looking at the appellations, then any of the panelists, please join in if I'm incorrect. I know that there's no sort of dedicated sweet wine appellations in the Loire Valley. For Sauvignon Blanc, there's for Chenin Blanc. However, there are a few producers that actually came across that they do make late harvest Sauvignon Blanc, but those pretty much the things that you buy on premise. as opposed at the winery, as opposed to being exported. But for sure, to think about the rolling hills that both Rebecca and Hillary mentioned, that there's not a lot of high elevations, and it's very close to the rivers of Loire and Cher in this case. So quite a bit of humidities and moisture can gather, which create a perfect opportunity for try this style of dessert wines. Any of the panelists that have tasted late harvest sweet wines or dessert wine that's made out of Sauvignon Blanc?
I've only had Chenin. Yeah. Yeah, sweet Chenin from Loire. Those long walks you do in Loire Valley, those, what are they called in French? They're like the run, I don't know what they're called, but you just walk around like the mountain and you taste as you go little bits of late harvest Chenin, but I've never had really a sweet Sauvignon Blanc.
Go ahead, sorry, please. What was that?
No, I was saying unless it came from California, because their Sauvignon Blancs tend to be more fruit forward and oversaturated with oak. If they do put it in oak, and then it will tend to be slightly more sweeter. That's all.
Okay, so we received a question from Liz, and Liz, the question she asked is about climate change. So thank you for asking the climate change questions. So one thing that I forgot to mention earlier when we talk about 2018 vintage, 18 is actually a warm vintage. So following by 16s and 17s, especially 17, which is quite a bit of frost that destroy a lot of crops in different parts of Loire. So with 18 was the first time that it was able to produce quality fruits in a while. And so what we are seeing in Loire during my visit last year and talking to the producer is that they're not seeing drastic climate change because Loire is relatively temperate. The raining patterns in Loire are throughout the year, as opposed to certain regions are kind of falls in spring and summers and without drier in the winters and fall. In Loire, the amount of rain kind of falls throughout the year. So what they're seeing are more of the unpredictable weather pattern, which means that the winters are warmer, which leads to the budding start earlier, which also leads to frost problems. So what they're seeing that especially in 2020, earlier this year, was a tremendous amount of rainfall during the earlier time. So that kind of created some potential for mildew problems. So the sort of mildew problems and fungus problem is the #1 problem in Loire, which also make farming biodynamically or sustainably very hard because if they don't spray, they're running into the risk of losing the crops. So it's sort of a battle that producers have to do. So in short, the climate change answer is that they are not, it's a very much producer by producers. They're thinking about what they should do, but at the same time, they are more concerned about combating the unpredictable weather patterns and hopefully that maybe down the road they're being attacking this problem more aggressively, but at the same time they haven't seen a drastic shift in terms of getting drier or getting too hot in any of that so far. Fingers crossed. Any other questions? Panelists, anything that we did not mention today that you'd like to talk about? Whether about the wine, about the region? Yes.
I don't have anything that we didn't mention, but I have a question for the three of you guys. Out of the 6 wines we tasted, which one is your favorite? If you can pick one, which out of the 6 ones we had, which one are you like? This is it. This is worth it.
No, I was just gonna mention how interesting it was that we went east, and it just so happened, in my opinion, for those that aren't like tasting along, it just kept getting bigger as far as body is concerned. Yeah, and I was like, wow, this is something I guess I never really thought about, but I'm loving that Pouilly-Fumé personally.
I love the Palais. It's it's a producer that I know very well, and it's really interesting to see that with Rebecca's 2 wines, there are actually 2 appellations that show they're in Sancerre, one on each side. And Menetou-Salon is of course not a region that's as well known as Pouilly-Fumé, but with the split plot coming from the Maroc, one of the very sort of few single plots Sauvignon Blanc produced here are definitely one of my favorites.
Yeah, I really like them. I have to say, I really enjoyed the Quincy. It's just so bright and briny, and it just perfect for the summer weather. They were also delicious, but yeah, that's the one I would just love to just drink and enjoy.
I'm a cheap date, and I've been enjoying this. I've been drinking it. It's great. I find it fantastic. It's one of my favorite things to recommend.
Thank you all, and thank you for bringing up that direction from east to west and how the wine changes from really sort of, more of that brighter, easier to drink and drink it anytime you want sort of examples. And as we closer to Sancerre on the eastern parts, more serious, more food and wine and with some potential ageability as well. So thank you, Moselle, thank you, Hilary, and thank you, Rebecca, for joining us today. Is there any other last minute questions before I move on to, okay, we actually do have questions. Someone just, so Farouk just posted questions. Have any of us had any Dagenau?
Yes. Yes, I have.
Great.
Memorable.
Yes. Yeah, it's definitely memorable. I haven't had the recent vintages, but definitely some of the most unique Sauvignon Blanc that you could taste. Very different than the 6 different examples that we taste today are, like a Dagenau for sure. And Moselle, there's a question about your neckwear.
My beads. So I wear beads. These particular beads, I wear them every day. It's they're not religious, they're not spiritual, but to me they mean something. It makes me feel whole and complete. So I make sure I have them on, and it's like my superpowers. As I don't know, the Green Lantern wears his ring, and Superman wears his cape, and Batman has his mask. Moselle has his beads.
That is awesome.
Great, perfect. Thank you so much, and thank you again, panelists. And really fun to chatting with you about all these wines. And as I mentioned, I promised, Spring to Loire, the annual Loire Valley Wine event was postponed earlier this year. However, it is coming back. So it's coming back in the fall this year in 2020, and in a slightly different format in partnership with 750. So it's 2 parts. The first is an in-person event that will be here in New York. Currently is scheduled on Thursday, September 24th. The event, of course, would be a walk-around tasting with all the proper safety, public health measures being adapted. And so that allow you opportunity to taste the wines in person along with meeting the importers of these wines as well. Secondly, for those that not outside of New York, a digital version of this walk-around tasting will be available online for people to connect to the importers and the producers and so on. So for more information, please stay tuned. They'll be posted on 750 daily platforms. But if you are, know that you're interested and want to keep sort of in the loop, please share your contact information through the chat functions, and the organizer will reach out with additional information when the time comes. Again, thank you so much for joining us today. I hope that you, audience, sorry we couldn't see you, but that you are having as much fun as we had today.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Delicious wine.